I'm very excited about the panel that we've been lucky enough to assemble for this topic, creativity that transcends borders. When we first defined this as a topic we wanted to cover, a couple of things struck us pretty quickly. One was that to talk about creative within this kind of context, where it is large enough and powerful enough to have a transcending effect across cultures and audiences, that was going to raise the bar. And two, we immediately decided as a group we wanted to discuss and share with you examples that we thought were of a pretty wide variety. And I have to say that when we first got together to assemble this material, the work we ended up pulling together was nothing like I originally envisioned. And the more that we got into it, I think the more we realized we were potentially onto something here. I am an advertising refugee. I admit it. I've been with FleishmanHillard for 3 years now. But in my past, I spent a lot of time running global advertising accounts. So the need to identify a unifying insight and execute it brilliantly was part of the job. And one of the things I picked up along the way is that diversity of perspectives is absolutely critical, particularly when you're looking to scale something very big. So that's how this panel was assembled here today. Shiv, I think you've probably got the coolest title I've ever heard of anybody's close near Jedi, Head of Global Brand and Marketing Transformation. I can't talk about all the things you're doing at Visa, of course. I'd love to get you to spill the beans, but in particular, the role that you're playing as it relates to technology and how it can bring a brand proposition to life, I think is very, very exciting, and it's playing a pretty fundamental role as well in how Visa goes to market. So thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who don't know Shiv, background is started out in Razorfish in the very early days of pioneering information architecture, user experience, launching the social media capabilities there, and then going to Pepsi for a while and really taking these skills to a whole nother level. So again, thank you, Shiv. Swan is Global Director of Consumer Brands at Siegel and Gale, and a creative director and designer, thank you, by training. And Ann and I have worked in the past together. As you all know, every once in a while, particular clients here, you ask agencies to assemble together for a major initiative, and Siegel and Gale and FleishmanHillard have partnered together a few times, Procter & Gamble among others. But what I really was excited about to have Ann's perspective here in particular is Ann lives in the world where a brand idea and creativity, creative thinking has to manifest itself in something that has quite a long degree of longevity because you're helping to architect a new identity and positioning for an organization or a brand. But second, more and more, what Ann is seeing is the need for the other disciplines to then take the nucleus of that idea and to make sure it really permeates an entire organization. So becoming much more familiar with and appreciative of the other disciplines, including internal comms and social, to make sure that that original creative idea is really effectively implemented, I think is one of the exciting things that she brings in terms of her perspective. Finally, Nick Parish, Editor-in-Chief of Contagious magazine. How many of you here are familiar with Contagious and consume Contagious? Phenomenal resource of, I have to say that it's your curation of the really compelling content from around the world that makes it just a great resource for us at least, and for the clients we make it available to. But Nick also has a very interesting perspective because he and his team are constantly on the hunt for those really innovative, haven't seen this before, what was the secret behind it kind of examples from anywhere around the world. So he proved to be a tremendous resource for us as well as we originally got together to think about what examples might we assemble and discuss for you today, and hopefully we'll have some time as well for some questions. Now, since we all here represent kind of a variety of backgrounds, one of the things that we knew early on, we had to sort of set the table, so to speak, and make sure that we're all speaking similar language. Creative is a very big topic, and I don't just mean creative in the small c, meaning the kind of content that's created constantly, but creativity in the biggest sense, really ideas that then have an effect on the way a company behaves and what kind of products are brought to life. Now, the thing that we all have in common here is that we think of creative as one of the ways to really have effective storytelling. And as we got together and started to look at some of the examples we're going to bring today, one thing that came out pretty clear, it's a lesson we all learn, I think, time and time again, is that one of the consistent ingredients behind all of them is there was a truth. There was a demonstrated insight about the audience that was brought to life in a variety of different ways. But at the end of the day, since this is really about creating relationships between an organization and an audience, the most powerful way to continue to do that, of course, is to demonstrate a really keen understanding for what's inside our heart, what's inside our head. And with that as a sort of stage setting for all of us, we began to share examples of work that we thought right now were really compelling examples where not just creative execution, but creative thinking, sometimes in a way that affects not just a brand platform, but an entire value proposition for a business, and sure, in some cases, communication techniques, was really, really interesting. And it's this diversity of examples and perspectives that really got us excited. So I think with this, we're going to jump into our first example. And this is something that appeared, I think some of you may have seen this perhaps 3 or 4 weeks ago, which is a campaign for UN Women that launched earlier in the year in UAE. And it really hit the multinational radar, I think it was about 3 weeks ago. And one of the things that struck us about it, and I'm going to give everybody a chance to sort of dissect it from their own point of view, one of the things that struck us about it is it revealed a fact or truth about the way in which our points of view about a variety of topics are revealed in the autofill search in Google. But in this particular example, I think also brought forward the power of a particular way to craft that creative, because the way in which you can simplify something visually can have a transformative effect. So this is some of the imagery. Again, if you're familiar with this work, when the agency that created this work was interviewed by, I believe it was AdFreak, it was the creative exploratory process that revealed that when you went to go into search, the answers to some of these questions about inequality, shocking results, and these were real. And this is really what they believed was the genesis of how it went viral, so to speak. And this is one that you identified for us pretty early on, I think, when we discussed. From a designer's perspective in particular, where your ability to tell stories through the visual is your primary skill. Talk to us about how you thought this just really was the game changer that we need to talk about today.
Sure. I mean, I think the idea that they used real women, first of all, those are real women from UNs across the country, so that was pretty remarkable. That the search was real, right? You start reading it and these are like unbelievable that people are saying this, right? It's shocking. But then the visual itself has such impact. I mean, it stops you. So you are going to look at it. You're going to go further. And I think all of those things coming together was just this perfect mix.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that struck us as well, too, is clearly the form factor here appears to be a print ad. But, the way in which it was redistributed and really left the border, so to speak, it wasn't about the print. It was about the imagery that that could be transformed and distributed everywhere. Nick.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a Back to the Future sort of situation where you get these campaigns that really are able to move around rapidly that have this single sort of striking, iconic image. In this case, it's this yawning, like, terribleness of human id, which, is Googling such things as, women cannot drive or whatever it is. But I think that, we're going to look at another campaign that's tangentially similar in terms of the sort of media it uses. But this one really spread and really became contagious because it has that single iconic sort of image that you're faced with, whether you see that on Twitter or Tumblr or Pinterest or wherever. That's just going to be big and shocking and bold and immediately states the premise of what the thing's driving at. We saw another really awesome campaign similar to this a couple years ago for I think it was Doctors Without Borders. It was Amnesty International, where they took full-page newspaper ads, and you could place your smartphone. They had the picture of Gaddafi or Ahmadinejad, and you could place your smartphone over the dictator's mouth, and it would speak using the voice of someone that had been jailed for war crimes in that country, or for speech crimes or whatever inside that country. So these are just bold and shocking and easily transmittable on social networks in very similar ways to the sort of construction and balance and design of a really great print ad.
Yeah. Shiv, this is obviously, digital is near and dear to your heart. That's I think one of the things I've seen most consistent in your background career. But the utilization of it in terms of how it affects a brand strategy, that's again one of the things I think is most exciting. But there's a certain degree of simplicity in how this was not only executed but really was carried through digitally. Is this something that you're inspired by? Is this the kind of thinking that particular Visa, that is such a single-minded, iconic brand? How does this inspire the kind of work you guys are thinking about creating?
Yeah, I sort of just can't get enough of this campaign, and I think even to call it a campaign doesn't do it justice. Because what's so interesting about it for me is it hits you at so many different levels. Because at one basic level, you're like, oh wow, there are people out there who think like this. And that's just like, that's exposing something that many of us didn't know or hadn't really consciously thought of. Then what it next does is it says, you go and search on Google and you'll see it for yourself.
Right.
And that I think is hugely, hugely powerful. Like I'm willing to bet, if you aren't familiar with this campaign and haven't done this already, at least half of you are going to go on Google and you're going to search those words just to see what happens. So I think it drives to behavior very quickly, which is really powerful. I mean, this is not a campaign just for UN women, the organization. It is for us understanding each other more. So it has a larger, really powerful purpose. And then the third piece that I like about it is in tune with the notion of the larger purposes, is that it makes us, it sort of hits you because it's embarrassing. We're in the 21st century. We're a world that's got, the fancy internet and fancy iPhones and all kinds of things.
And we think we're evolving.
We think we're evolving, but through this crazy way that it's exposing, sort of hidden truths, we aren't that evolved. So I think it's extremely powerful, and it's just so beautifully and elegantly done because we recognize, those search fields. That's a part of our visual language. We're struck by those strong faces, because we recognize them as people we may know or our family members or whatever it may be, or could be us, and it just hits you as a result. So I think it's hugely powerful for its simplicity, for the embarrassment, at least it caused in
Sure.
me, and how it translates a message into a behavior. That it's exposing the insight, it's exposing the truth. And I think that's huge.
Well said. Nick, so since you study these kinds of examples on a pretty frequent basis, these meaning real game changers, really innovative. Of course, the trick now is how do you follow this up?
Right.
What if you were brought in by the team, as I know you guys are frequently, to help inspire the thinking in the process, particularly in a challenging case like this, where you've really hit a nerve with a concept, but now you've got everybody's attention. How do you continue to do that so that you really start to have an effect on the issue? What are the kinds of things that a client and a creative team is going to have to consider and look for as the next way to build on something that, they say lightning strikes, once, but our task, of course, in many cases, is do it over and over and over again.
Get that lightning there again.
That's right.
Same way. I'll tell you a story. I didn't tell you about this earlier, and I don't know if I can really tell this story, but an audience of PR professionals, you can keep this stum, I think.
Yeah. Watch the Twitter feed on the left.
So I was in San Francisco this summer, and up at a friend's house at a house party pretty late at night. And as happens in San Francisco, if you hang out late enough, you tend to meet really interesting people. And so I got to talking to this guy, and his business is gaming autocomplete on Google by essentially having thousands of people in a Southeast Asian country who proxy to different areas in the world and run searches. And so if you give him a term and you give him the 3 results you want to appear below that, he will essentially, along with a bundle of cash, I'm sure, essentially make that happen. And the guy who's hosting the party was like, yeah, it really works, check it out. And he took my phone and he put his own name in the search box. And I was like, oh, what did this guy like? What did he put as the terms that would come up? Single SF, eligible bachelor, and table tennis prodigy. And so those immediately flipped up. And like I'm, as a single guy on the make, it was probably very successful for him when women were Googling his name. But the lesson here, and the thing that I think is important to think about when you're creating this stuff, is like a simple economics lesson that we all probably learned in like 8th grade. And that is that smart people think at the margins. And this, I think, holds true for any kind of emerging media. And Stephen was talking about earlier about this idea of the adjacent possible. But this kind of marginal activity could form the basis of an insight, which could form the basis of something that's going to be spread far and wide. So keeping with that sort of marginal area where the media is not fully developed, you can do really, really interesting things. Now it's probably used up, as we'll see in this next case, and the fact that somebody's made a business out of engineering these results. But there's always another margin. There's always kind of another frontier. But it's about being sort of aware enough and mindful enough to continue pushing in those directions.
Can I just say something? Well, what I find interesting is the behavior of searching online for something is not even remotely marginal. We search online a lot more than we press a button on our TV remote today. I don't have the stats, but I'm quite certain that's the case. Where it gets really interesting is when we look at it from the lens of creativity and brands and campaigns, we still think this is marginal behavior, and that is mainstream behavior. Mm-hmm. And that's where it's a little crazy, and we have to sort of flip it. It's like we ourselves are stuck, rooted too deeply in a paradigm of another world.
Yeah, I mean, the marginal part is obviously like using that as a media.
Yeah, but it should be in the center. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, it's a behavior, like you say, that millions of people do every day, multiple times.
Yeah. So as Nick mentioned, along the way, as we were discussing an example, Nick brought to our attention the fact that there's another campaign by a candy bar named Rom in Romania, right? In November of 2011. The team stumbled on the same insight, essentially, that this technology that we're so familiar with sometimes it's a mirror to us, and in many cases, what's reflected back in the mirror is a little bit disappointing. In this case, I think clearly a completely different context, completely different tone, and the idea here was to change the perception and start to introduce and inject into the engine, essentially, the kind of positive messages that Romanians want to see to make them feel a little bit more, raise that nationalistic pride. You want to talk about some of the creative elements that were part of this?
Yeah, and this was a follow-on from a campaign, to talk about lightning striking twice. This was a follow-on from a campaign that they created 6 months or 8 months prior, where they took ROM, which is the kind of candy bar of Romania. It's got the Romanian flag on it, and they changed it to American ROM. And they basically said, look, we're going to make this an American candy, and they hired a kind of cheesy American actor to talk about how they're taking it over and hijacking it. And it created a huge public outcry, and one of those kind of like bait and switch type campaigns. So they kind of had to figure out what are we going to do to follow that, and they looked at this idea of autocomplete. And it works because Romanian and Gypsy are essentially the same word, I think, in Romanian. And so you had all these sort of autocomplete results for people that were searching for Romani or elements of that. I think the difference between the UN one and this one is that ultimately one is for a candy bar, despite the fact that it's got this nationalistic fervor, and one is for like worldwide gender equality and like rights for like people that have been disabused or people that have been maltreated or these kind of like weird notions of sexism that the society has. So it's much easier for people to get behind one than the other.
Right. The context of what's being reflected back to you is much more significant in one versus the other.
You can take a stand against things you think are wrong by sharing this thing. You're not just kind of sharing a giggly candy bar video.
Yeah.
I think it really draws to the forefront the whole question of that increasingly for brands to survive and to succeed, they themselves have to have a purpose, a larger purpose that they stay true to, and that purpose needs to be reflected in everything that they do, not just their marketing, but what their business stands for, how the business operates. This, unfortunately, I think fell flat because it was trying to reach, it was just trying to be cute. It was playing in the purpose space without realizing it because it was hitting upon, that raw insight. But it was frivolous. It didn't do justice to it. So it was tragic.
Yeah, and didn't leave the borders.
Yeah.
I think early on as well, one of the first things that Anne noticed about it as well is the way in which this brilliantly powerful, simple idea that what you put in is going to reflect something back to you in a surprising way. How one was just done with such a brutal degree of, I think, simplicity and focus. This pretty much set everything for this initiative. Whereas the draw and the technique for Ram was a little more buried, shall we say? It wasn't quite as front and center.
You had to really look into this. Right?
So can we go back? Sorry, I just can't get over it. I just want to mention, you were asking, what's the phase 2 of this campaign? What could it be or what should it be? So random thought just struck me, which is that UN Women should, ask companies and brands or on Google, whoever, to buy search terms against those horrible phrases that then drive to a positive action. And I think, that's when you're taking a
hijack what you want to change.
And making meaning and behavior around it, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Great
I mean,
idea.
yeah, absolutely. And that kind of plays to the thing you mentioned earlier about entering this kind of ecosystem that we're all familiar with, which is AdWords type search ads, and kind of trying to put a countervailing force against that trend of people searching for these things. Maybe some of these, are just ignorant. Maybe they're people that are trying to find out why, some countries don't allow women to drive. And so those sort of educative aspects could be something that a brand could completely get behind in a really meaningful, important way.
So maybe the question is, has this initial step forward for this campaign, is this the beginning of a much richer engagement? So this is essentially could be the intention getter, but it's going to reveal all the engagement platforms that could be activated and address point by point. To your point, use this as a way to start to dissect the issues that we want to change specifically.
Yeah, and I think there's a sort of open door for collaboration between brands that might not have been coordinated before, where this was probably come up, it was a couple of copywriters or a copywriter and an art director at this agency that had a cool idea and did it for their pro bono client. But if somebody like Visa gets behind it, or if somebody else gets behind it, it can really add muscle to this idea, and everybody wins. You take these guys that came up with this original idea, and you propel it even further, and then you create the sort of robustness that a big marketer can actually make impact on. That this team working on kind of a side project probably couldn't. So there's this sort of collaborative aspect that I think it would do everyone a service to get behind these things that pop up, just to push them further and further up.
Yeah,
Right.
totally.
Creating that initial momentum is always the hardest thing, so then the trick is how you go forward. I mean, the two final thoughts before we move on here. One I think what everybody should hopefully find inspiring here is that, particularly with the experience that you have with autofill and Google search, that the experience that consumers of every kind are having with technology, sometimes the lightning in the bottle, the magic, the insight, it can actually reveal itself through an unexpected gem or an Easter egg of the technology, the experience. Sometimes it's going to reveal, again, in this case, it's going to reveal something that was unexpected, but with so much participation, with so much input from consumers, that's getting me at least to believe that with all that input, with all that, it's the digital diary of all of our behavior, we're going to start to find some of the nuggets and insights that can then lead to something bigger. Because I think, as you point out, the magic with this now is, now that this has everybody's attention and is revealing the specific issues, it can then manifest itself in a pretty robust campaign to really drive the change, now that this has, again, gotten everybody's attention. Next example, very interesting. We wanted to make sure that we also looked at not just forms of communication that were very inspiring, but examples of where you couldn't really tell the difference between the marketing strategy and the business strategy. And this touches on some things we've talked about in our past as well, like purpose-driven brands. It's a relatively newer way to think about brand strategy that adds another useful kind of tool or perspective on what a brand is and how it stands apart from everybody else. And early on, Nick brought up GoPro as something that had hit their radar a few times. And as a consumer, it hit my radar as well, because I was noticing more and more that a lot of things that I was interested in particularly on YouTube, were being called out by users as not just being, a video about something, a Sunday drive with my Harley, but it was my GoPro video. And that instantly sort of told you, okay, you're going to be getting kind of a bird's eye view of something dramatic and compelling. So I thought, okay, this is interesting. This is not so much about a campaign or piece of creative, but another way to think about creativity and creative thinking, particularly when you think about this category. Digital cameras. I mean, they're what? They're the 900th brand to show up in this space, right? Not necessarily pioneering anything with the technology. The form factor and the understanding of the audience, I think, is really what we sort of fell in love with and got excited about. So we started thinking about more and more, what is the creativity behind GoPro at its essence, and what is it that is allowing it to grow at an unbelievable rate? So it's one of the stats here. In the first half of 2012, they owned 21% of the global digital camcorder market. Same quarter the year before, they owned 6%. And they just got a major cash investment. So they're growing primarily through, we think, the interesting way in which they are appealing to an audience by positioning the product in a very particular way within the context of people's lives and how they like to share information. In this particular case, I think it was inspired by sort of the extreme point of view. Interesting happens is, as we're thinking about GoPro more and more, I don't know if anybody here watched 60 Minutes this past weekend. Anderson Cooper did a 15-minute piece on this unbelievable phenomenon called GoPro. So let's take a look at some of the pieces that we stitched together for you here.
GoPros are now everywhere. People use them to turn family home videos into images even strangers might enjoy watching. Mount the camera on a stick, and a game of fetch with your dog takes on a whole new focus. GoPro turned the dolphin video into a commercial. It has a team that scours YouTube and the web looking for amateur videos it can feature on TV or online. This video of Charlie Ray Wick learning how to walk and going airborne became a commercial that ran during the Super Bowl. The strategy is to take advantage of what might be GoPro's most effective sales force, its own customers.
You get new video all the time.
All the time. So this is actually a video of a firefighter rescuing and resuscitating a kitten.
Yeah. And a video like that would very easily go viral around the world. I mean,
oh my God. Yeah.
And that's essentially a commercial for GoPro.
Essentially a commercial for GoPro. It's a marketer's dream. And it's all based off of authenticity, right? It's our customers doing interesting things around the world, and they're so stoked that they're able to finally self-document these things that they like to do and share it with people. They're so stoked at how good they look in the video that when they share the video, they often give us credit. My GoPro ski trip, my GoPro day at the park with my kids.
You're the only CEO I've ever interviewed who's used the word stoked.
Like 5 million times.
This was a fascinating one for us to get together and talk about because it doesn't have any of the obvious, call it, creative examples here. Again, this goes to having a very creative point of view and thinking about how your brand strategy is your business strategy. The reason why this is really worth discussing is, in many cases, we're not always in the business every single day of manufacturing compelling, engaging media. In many cases, we are helping to author the story of an enterprise or the new story of an enterprise, particularly in a case like a Visa, a brand that has got very well-established positioning and equity, but for a variety of reasons, it needs to evolve into a new space. That's a very, very delicate thing. So creativity absolutely needs to manifest itself in that kind of context as well. It's not just the artistry and the craft of the stimulus that goes in front of your audience, but it's creative thinking when you think about how a story is now going to evolve, and it has to be credible, and it has to make sense, and it has to stretch you into sort of a new place. And this is something I think that we should remember, that when it comes to creativity, that art as well, reshaping the story of an enterprise and what it stands for and who it's for and how it's evolving, is as critical as the ability to have taste and judgment and to spearhead work that has a really powerful insight and is very, very well crafted. Nick, your points of view on this one, because again, we had a lot of passion for this right out of the gate.
I love GoPro. I wish I could be like half as talented at doing anything active as the most of the people that post stuff from their GoPro. But even the extreme skiing stuff is pretty interesting. They had a trombonist, and GoPro is one of my favorite brands right now. I think they're doing everything right. They're obviously very successful business-wise. And I'll tell you why in a minute. That's not entirely GoPro related. They had the trombonist from like the New York Philharmonic put a GoPro on the end of his trombone, and then play his trombone. And like his face kind of coming in and out of various degrees of focus is entertaining content. Like literally everything that you film with a GoPro is made somehow more entertaining. It's just this kind of magic that platform has. But you're probably thinking like, oh, well, my brands don't manufacture like extreme sports electronic chronicling gear. But look, the secret to getting ahead in the 21st century is helping people to do the things they already want to do. For a brand, for a company, for anyone. And GoPro, all they really did was and the founder talks about this in the 60 Minutes piece, he just wanted a way to kind of catalog his surfing exploits that was easy. And soon he realized that mounting the camera on something else externally would give him a stable platform to do that, and allow him to record cool videos. But like, so many brands we see are building services onto their offering, and it becomes an integral part of their marketing because people are interacting with this stuff 24/7. But if you figure out kind of what people want from your brand or what people want to do, and you help them do it a little bit faster or a little bit better, that's really like I think the essence of 21st century creativity. Not only entertainment and doing really insightful, cool stuff that touches a heartstring or tells a really good story, but actually making something useful for people. I think that's something that can't be overstated.
Mm. And it's interesting. One of the things that you pointed out was the statement for the brand is be a hero. Mm-hmm. And I went, that's not right. Be a hero. No, it's a hero. No, that's not what you see manifested in here. So what conjures up the right kind of message for these guys, given that this is ultimately about people sharing pretty inspiring, in some cases mundane every day, but in other cases really extreme snippets of their life.
Right. Well, I think that one of the brilliant things, I'm just going to go back a little bit to what you were saying with GoPro before I answer that question. It's so authentic. They could have gone any which way, right? When they did their advertising, they could have said, this is a great camera, right, blah, blah, blah. But what they did was they actually showed what it did, right? Yeah. They showed people what this camera did. They engaged the consumer. And so I think there's a lot of brands that if you look at what you have and you figure out that insight and what is it really doing for your customer, then I think you'll have something great. They really, if they had just showed this camera, I don't know that it would have had the same, connection with consumers of actually seeing what it can do and the stories that it comes to life. So I was saying that these are all stars, right? In their own movies. And they're everywhere, and it's terrific.
The crazy star, I believe, actually, was what you mentioned the other day. Mm-hmm. Sorry, Nick.
The crazy thing about, okay, so you guys know, the glass films that Google's doing, where they send people up in a hot air balloon, or they play badminton, or whatever it is. If you put one of those next to the content that GoPro's pulling out of, people in wingsuits and people doing backflips over, 70-foot canyons, it's just it's like an empty, dry sponge versus one that's completely soaked with adrenaline. And that stuff just can't be bought. You just can't engineer it. And that's really what I think the heroic aspect of that content is.
Yeah. And just to build on that, with GoPro, I find it hugely frightening in a very liberating sort of way. And the reason for that is because I think about it as such amazing, amazing marketing with practically no real marketing department, with practically no real budget, and with practically denying their original brand equity. If you think about what the company was founded on, and even the name of the cameras, and the brand, GoPro, given how GoPro is being used and how it's become a part of culture today, you would never call that thing GoPro. You'd be like, go whatever, or go, I don't know, go have fun. But what makes it so powerful is that they didn't let their brand or their business strategy or their business plan get in the way of their consumers and the way they wanted to use that product and sort of make it their own. And I think that takes immense courage and confidence. and sort of, not having too many sacred cows now. And I think that's a wonderful thing. The other piece that's interesting, as I was thinking about this, is you compare this to Sony. So I can imagine, and I like Sony a lot, but I can imagine like a year and a half from now, them looking at their market share charts and saying, oh, GoPro is 6%, we have 35% or whatever. We don't need to worry about these guys.
A niche player.
Right. Yeah, they're a niche player. They don't have the brand equity. They don't have the awareness, the exposure. They don't have the distribution. And overnight, it changed dramatically, like dramatically. And there's a really strong learning there, which is a lot of the tools that we've used historically to measure the strength of the brand, the strength of a creative program, of marketing, or you name it, is not that valuable anymore because it can be meaningless in a heartbeat. And that's, I think, an awesome lesson from GoPro. Yeah.
Right. Well said.
Good point.
All right. This next example, this is actually one that I was most surprised, I think, to see that we eventually brought forward because it's one I think most of you are going to be familiar with. But we found kind of a new sense of appreciation for it because this is definitely an example of articulating an interesting, unique point of view about a brand and having it be instantly, but over time, successful globally to in this case, a B2B audience, which is the We Love Logistics platform for UPS. In terms of a marketing challenge, think about, I think it was 2011 when this campaign launched for UPS. Think about the competitive context where DHL, internationally, a strong player, but FedEx really, in many cases, considered to be out-marketing UPS in a category where it's really tough to understand and notice the subtleties and differences between the two. But one simply had a more polished, louder, more vibrant marketing machine. Any kind of sporting event that was coming up, you could look forward to a funny FedEx commercial. And they kept the brand really top of mind, which is an old play in the playbook when you're in a arguably a commodity category. And so really owning that mind space through really effective execution of marketing communications. What we found really compelling in this particular case for UPS is, again, going back to one of the things we said at the top here, where an insight, a real compelling truth, when you reflect that to your audience, that's one of the very powerful ways you can attract, but also start to build a real strong relationship. To describe the business they're in as logistics and to boil down what is inherently a very complex supply chain, both on the shipping side and on the client side, the customer side, whether you're a small, medium-sized business, a large business. And then to do it in a way that reflects kind of a shared value. We are both in this together. We geek out about this stuff. We are constantly looking for the micro-millimeter of improvement that we can make because we just absolutely love this. And that's why you as a customer should be you should feel completely, you should have the peace of mind and know that the things that worry you the most, particularly if you're in charge of these kind of decisions, are you getting all the products you need through your food chain to the right customer? As a brand, we value the same thing. Our purpose is yours. Our purpose is to leverage this sweet science of logistics in order to make your business move around the world. So I'm going to play a quick piece here that recaps the idea.
Logistics makes the world work better.
When it's planes in the sky for a chain of supply, that's logistics. When the parts for the line come precisely on time, that's logistics. A continuous link that is always in sync, that's logistics. Carbon footprint reduced, bottom line gets a boost, that's logistics. With new ways to compete, there'll be cheers on Wall Street, that's logistics. When technology knows right where everything goes, that's logistics. Bells will ring, ring-a-ding, 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 that's logistics. There will be no more stress, cause you've called UPS, that's logistics.
So Nick, your perspectives on this campaign. I mean, again, it doesn't have the usual obvious characteristics of GWOW, but in terms of a brilliant creative thinking that helps you rethink how you describe who you are, what you're offering, and how you tell those stories from your perspective.
Yeah, I think this is important and notable because it sort of points to the further dissolution of the divide between B2B and B2C. I think that that's something that's almost irrelevant, that sort of differentiation. Like, business customers are going to want information. And there's an easy way to get people information in this day and age, and that's to just publish it anywhere. But I think that, like, what's interesting to think about is all the people that are total nerds for logistics that aren't the sort of audience of UPS, and as sick in the head as they are, and maybe I'm one of them, they're the ones that are going to buy like a book about how the pallet, like the shipping pallet, revolutionized the world. And so UPS now has like this the best sort of insight-driven campaigns give you license to play in really weird zones that you just didn't have license to play in before. And so UPS can now enter into all these sort of different discussions that they probably couldn't before. GE's doing really similar stuff, where they're kind of 6-second science stuff on Vine, all these sorts of things. Previously, their sort of B2B advertising would have been like these kind of glossy, big, like print pieces showcasing like the features of the crazy engines that they're creating, or the medical devices or things like this. I don't think that people that are interested in that stuff's going to find it. But the possibility of entertaining an even broader sort of audience group than the trade audience that you had before is really, really interesting in terms of just generating oomph and generating backing behind the stuff that you're doing. So that's, I think, what we found really interesting about this sort of stuff. And we're really looking at that, like stuff that was traditionally B2B, as being just more open and interesting, and using that to do really kind of weird stuff that attracts all the people that are interested in a brand.
And among other things, this is also an example where visually, the way in which that theme, that line is brought to life. They leverage the extra sort of symbolic meaning of the heart. Talk to us about that. Clearly, the visual goes hand in hand, and in many cases can kind of exponentially increase the effect of how something it resonates and how it sticks in your mind. This is one clearly where we've talked about FedEx in terms of their, in general in the industry, their identity. One of the things they have going forward is they've got that embedded arrow in there. But in this case, graphic design is used to telegraph the message here.
Yeah, I mean, I love the idea. They took the idea of logistics, which is not an exciting idea, right? Logistics, it's boring. And then I love logistics, right? So immediately this is an interesting way to communicate, and it changes your perspective. And then they have this great campaign around that. But at the end of the day, they found something that was really true to their business. Logistics, whether it's boring or not, it's really true to their business. And they highlighted that, and they embraced it, and they brought it forward. And I think that that's why it's so successful, and it's resonating with their customers, because like, yeah, of course, logistics. I love logistics, right? It's a great idea. It's a great campaign, and visually, I think it's excellent the way they very simply stated it. But it's, again, it's finding that truth in your business and in your brand. I think when you see brands that don't connect or are losing the connection with the consumers because they've forgotten what their story is, or they've forgotten what that actual connection is with the consumer.
To rediscover that, it's part of the process.
And this is brilliant.
So Shiv, this is also, Nick touched on something that was interesting. The tone and manner of B2B communications versus B2C. And there are a few that stand out constantly over and over again, the IBMs and the GEs of the world that have a tone and manner that treats the audience as human first, and therefore it's got emotion, it's got a lot of the other characteristics of consumer campaigns. Visa, arguably is primarily a B2B offering, but the end result, the net effect, is clearly across every kind of audience. So this has got to touch a little bit of nerve as well for you, and how you think about the Visa brand and how to transcend. Whether this is your role as a purchase decision maker, or you are an individual and you just need to have this brand top of mind for other reasons.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's fascinating, and I thought Nick was spot on when he said, well, firstly, there's no such thing as a B2B brand versus a B2C brand, and this really makes that point so nicely. The second thing that I feel that's really powerful in it is it shows that any brand and any company can have like a lot of sex appeal. It's how you build that brand, how you build that company. I mean, if you can do it with logistics, you had better be able to do it with anything else out there. So that's, I think, the second thing. The third thing that it makes me think, and this really goes back to the way Visa operates too, because we're both a B2B and a B2C. B2B in that, the banks are our clients, they issue Visa cards, and they run on the Visa network. And yet we're B2C because, the more you use your Visa card, the more, profitable we become. So it's both. What I really wondered as I was thinking about this campaign is this having an impact on end consumers, meaning, UPS's clients, customers? So for example, if I go into work, I'll be back at my desk tomorrow morning, bright and early, and there's a chance I may have a FedEx package on my desk and a UPS package. There are days when I get packages like that. Now, historically, I'd have always opened the FedEx package first. I don't know why, and I think that's a matter of marketing, that's a matter of branding. I think it's more important. I think there's probably something more interesting in there. I feel closer to that brand. I don't know, but
it was the movie Castaway. You just couldn't. The brand.
I just do it. I just open that one first. Now I might open the UPS one, and I think that's the power of marketing and probably the power of unintended benefits through this campaign as well. And I hope and wish, and I would love to see if they're measuring that kind of impact as well, because that in turn then can have a more direct impact on the business too.
Right, right. And when you think about the audience as humans first, that also allows you to transcend so that you are thinking about all of your constituencies, your potential employees, your recruiters, your shareholders. I mean, that's one of the things I think that makes our perspective, particularly on the PR side, particularly powerful and interesting, is we have this complete holistic perspective on the relationship between a public and a brand or enterprise, because we think constantly about every single kind of stakeholder, every kind of audience, whereas other parts of the marketing mix predominantly are consumed by the buyer, right? The person who's going to make the decision or purchase it, and having that broader perspective, in some cases, I think arguably, allows us to have as good a chance as anybody else to be able to contribute to the ongoing narrative and story about an organization, because we are thinking about it from the broadest possible perspective, which is the public at large.
And just along those lines, I forget, I think it was either Peter Drucker or Michael Porter who said, you've got to take care of your customers' customers. And I think this gets to that. And when you do that, it's nirvana. Yeah.
Okay. Last example here is we were hopeful that we could also bring something that was probably intended to achieve the goal of these other examples here, which is to transcend borders and really have a multinational or global impact. But it's debatable whether or not they accomplished it. In this case, perhaps time will tell if it was successful or not, but this is something I think everybody watched pretty closely, I believe, in the month of September, which was Google taking a particularly interesting Yahoo taking a particularly interesting approach to updating and refreshing its identities. Remember the story here? Marissa Mayer jumped in over the weekend and fired up the Photoshop herself and got involved with the creation of the identity. Let's take a look at what the work looked like.
When we first met, your hair was long and brown, you hadn't shed. Cut it all off and now it's long once again. Oh, it's long once again.
So over the course of 30 days, one new potential future identity for the brand was revealed, and culminating in the last day, the final identity. One of the reasons why we thought this was interesting to bring up is, one is this is a scenario I think many of us here in the room have faced or continue to face, which is when something significant is happening for a company and identity is going to be refreshed. And I think as Nick pointed out early on when we first talking about this, everybody's going to be pissed in the beginning.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to be happy.
And look, you guys are all going to experience this, or you have. People just love to complain about logo redesigns. it's like this weird part of our like lizard brain that just says like, oh my God, it's different. Like, I hate it. I think that like, just weather that storm, I guess, and like the internet will be talking about something else in 5 minutes time, don't worry. Very rarely do these things actually ever result in that, like American Airlines, Gap, like all these different brands just get like, shit flung at them whenever they change their logo, and it's not really fair. I think the biggest interesting thing here is why Yahoo chose to prolong that for 30 days, as opposed to just doing it all of a sudden and moving on. But it's intrinsic that when you make a logo change, you will hear from every logo designer in the world when apparently there are billions more of them when that stuff actually happens. But I think you just got to kind of ride it out in most cases.
So one of the reasons why we brought this forward is because at the very least, this is an example of creative thinking and searching for an unusual way to engage your audience about pretty standard issue corporate event, right? And looking for ways to do it that sends a message. What that message is, I think, is to be debated. And in particular, when we first brought this up, that was one of the things that I remember you kind of raised was, what message are they trying to send? Forget what the final output was and whether you like it, but what am I supposed to think of you as a result of this experience where you've unfolded for me all the possibilities, but you're not really involved. You're not going to really participate. You're not going to help me choose. I'm going to tell you what the winner is at the end of 30 days. Right.
So I think there was, the lack of engagement with the consumer. I mean, there was a great opportunity there. I also think, 29 is too many. I've never been able to present 29 identities and been able to stand behind all 29. So I think, you have to think about that too. Like, why? Why change the identity? Why show 29 versions? It's almost like a crisis. Like, who are we? Like, you're searching for who you are, when really, I think if they had just stepped back, thought about their story, thought about their positioning, the identity would then be true to that. Like, it's almost the reverse. They're trying to create a new identity to create their story, when in truth it should be creating a story and a truth and then an identity.
And go from there.
That was kind of my issue with that.
Yeah. Last night, Shiv, we talked about how some of us have a sort of a nostalgic soft spot in our hearts for Yahoo, and we're rooting for them in terms of really having confidence that they've kind of recaptured their soul of who they are. And we all kind of nodded our heads along the way and said, you're right, this is one of those brands where it's still got that resident goodwill there. And then the question is, can they show a unique and interesting and believable take on what the brand is moving forward?
Yeah, I'm glad you didn't bring up what else I said last night. I have to admit, I really struggle with this, and I struggle with it on a lot of different levels. Firstly, and most rawly, as Anne eloquently described, it doesn't do justice to what a brand can be about or what marketing is. And it doesn't, I think, in any way does justice to Yahoo's legacy, going back to 92 and 93 and, when they went public and those amazing moments and how much we used it. But I also struggle with it so much because, you compare it to what Google is doing with their logo, the Google Doodle, and how every day there's a different story, it's something in culture, and arguably they're the ones who are behind, the current craze around real-time marketing before anyone else. They will be doing that every day, and it's such a wonderful, powerful thing. Marissa comes over from Google, she's pressing the reset on Yahoo. It was an opportunity to up the game in terms of the role a logo can play in people's lives, especially when they think that Yahoo's part of your daily habit, and this frivolous adventure did none of that. So I struggled with it. I thought there's so much potential, and it sort of, in my mind, seemed a waste of time and just us talking to ourselves in marketing circles. But the other reason why I struggled with it, which was, I think, a lot more troubling for me also, is Yahoo's business model is driven predominantly by advertising. So they work very closely with brands, and the story that they have is, we help you build your brand with large audiences on scale, and more scale than anyone else has on the internet. This exercise didn't give me confidence that they really understood marketing or branding. In fact, it made me think the otherwise. It made me feel that any brand I have the good fortune to represent, to be the voice of, I don't want it to be caught up in that frivolous new logo every day of the month game. So I'm sorry, I really struggled with this.
Yeah. Well, looking for a bright spot somewhere in here. I think what I was struck by when this was originally unfolding was, what I sensed was there is an attempt here by the company to make a statement about how things are going to be different now and how the leadership at the top is going to take a different, and in this case clearly, very, very hands-on approach to every kind of fundamental decision that's going to be made in the company. To your point, the tragedy perhaps was the message that it sent when this is a brand that needs to demonstrate, among other things, a greater sensitivity and awareness of and appreciation for brands. Instead, I think what you saw was what happens when an engineering mindset, when an engineer, can kind of recode the identity herself, just like that. That was part of the magic of the products as Google's being built before she moved over. I took and understood what message potentially was trying to be set out there, but instead, I think like everybody else here, we thought, we're still rooting for sure, but looking for ways to engage with your audience that reminds them again what's special about you. Not taking a page out of Google's playbook, evolving our identity and hands-on engineering, but taking it out of the essence of this particular brand. That's what's going to help this brand.
There are a lot of great logo designing firms out there, and then when you see the kind of Tumblr post that comes with the last logo, and it says there's a line in there that's like, and then we turn the exclamation point just 9 degrees for the extra bit of whimsy. And it's like, okay, that's like the first sentence ever uttered by a self-aware machine. It seems like it's like we've just engineered this whimsy. There's lots of great logo designers out there. Let them have it. Don't do it over the weekend with like the CEO and a couple of people in the marketing department. Like, let them get on with it. I mean, there's reason to be optimistic because Yahoo usually buys companies and then ruins them. So at least they're moving horizontally now. Sorry.
I'm looking for it on the
board
over there. I want to see it word for word. Again, This was, I think, a fascinating example to talk about, again, because many of us here in the room find ourselves in these kind of scenarios, and we have to sort of brace for impact. We have to prepare what the story is going to be, but more importantly, I think what we all see is the role that we can play with our client partners is not just telling the story that we think is going to be the most compelling to be heard, but helping shape the actual story and being part of the co-authoring. That takes a little bit of the mindset from the brand management side, from the marketing side, where you are as in on the crafting as you are in the representing and communicating. And that's, again, why I'm so thankful for you guys joining us today and walking us through these very, very diverse examples. I think I've become like new fans of these brands again now that I have new reasons to appreciate what they're doing and what they're going through.
Even Yahoo?
Absolutely. Yahoo logo appreciation.
I'm not a fan of brands dying. Absolutely not. So that, again, thank you very much. Thank you for your time. You want to take any questions?
Well, the clock is down to about 13 seconds, so
make it a vine.
If you want to ask one really pithy question with one really pithy answer, we can do that.
I'll ask you a quickie. Do you think the success, and I think, I'm sorry, and I don't think Yahoo is successful at all, micromanaging, but do you think the success of the ones that were successful, like UN Women and not at UPS, but another UPS where they show the shoes and returning shoes, do you think it's because the brand becomes so secondary and so kind of quiet? I mean, it's really much more an ad about shared purpose than it is about the brand, and you really almost don't see the brand.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, my view is absolutely, and I think that's where we as marketers and communicators are catching up with people, and people are ahead of us and consumers in that they want the brands to be secondary. They want them to support their lives versus distract from it or take away from it. And I think that's what's going to drive the next major change in marketing. It's not about social or Twitter or feeds. It's about that fundamental shift. And as a result, I think companies are going to spend less in marketing and more on product, because the pressure's just been raised. Yeah.
Well said. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you again.
Thanks very much, everybody.